All right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you all are doing well today. I'm going to get us started with our Power Hour. And I just want to take a quick moment. Thank you, Jessica, for being here today and being willing to present. So today's Power Hour is Ethical Data Collection 2, where Jessica Grant who is the Assistant Director of Survey Research for Survey Research and Development in the Odum Institute for Research and Social Science at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She's going to discuss today practical ways working professionals can use social science research principles to help inform practices within the workplace. So we'll let Jessica go ahead and do her presentation, and then if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat and we'll do questions at the end. Thank you, Jessica. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Let me just pull up here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Do you see a PowerPoint presentation?
Yep, it's set up.
Great. I still, even though 3 years into this, I still kind of just cross my fingers and hope that the planets are aligned for everything to work whenever working in Zoom. So thank you again for having me today. I'm going to talk about ethical data collection, practical applications for working professionals. Here we go. So first up, there's a quote here that I like to start out these conversations with. As ethical lapses on a grand scale appear in the media, it heightens our awareness of the importance of addressing ethics in all dimensions of our lives. And I like this quote because it directly addresses, how we see more and more examples of ethical issues that occur in our daily life. And it's very individualistic, right? So it talks about that we need to address ethics in our lives. You're not looking outward, but inward. And for people who are working, who are in the working population, our time and employment is a significant dimension of our life because we spend so much time, energy, and effort in the workplace. So we have to be addressing ethics in such that large space that we occupy in the workplace. And so my background is in social science. And here, there's this nice word cloud of how social science, it really covers several different subject areas. I have extensive expertise in social science data collection and particularly data collection operations. I've done this for about 20 years now. And since around the mid-70s, social science research has had a lot of guiding principles or best practices for how data collection should occur and how people should be treated during that process. And so again, since social science covers so many areas, it's been a natural progression that for businesses in these areas or in these subject matter areas to take guidance from many of these social science practices. Now, many professions, as you all know, have dedicated standards, ethical guidance, practices that, these are not replaced. Social science principles do not override any of these standards, but I think the framework, and when I have this presentation and conversation, it really can complement or supplement a lot of those existing standards. Now, many professions or industries do not necessarily have dedicated or documented ethical standards, or in some cases, those established protocols do not specifically address the treatment of humans or how information or data should be gathered or protected. So oftentimes it's up to individuals in the workplace to really think about ethics and ethical practices. So even if you are not set out to be an academic or work in research, if you're not looking to produce presentations or publications, many of these principles can still be applied to fields that gather information and data. All right, so first up, what do we even mean by data, right? So it's a term that's tossed around a lot. And so that's the first order of business. We need to identify, like, what do we mean? What are types of data that we want to talk about? And in today's conversation, we're going to cover these 4 types. So what's called personally identifiable information, protected health information, and we're going to go through these in more detail and have a lot of examples to go through. Educational records, and then also talk about data in both hard copy and electronic form. Okay, so who interacts with data? So we have this nice picture here of several different professions, industries, businesses. And I would claim that most professions and businesses gather or interact with some type of data. And again, you know, it can be pretty obvious if you're an academic professional or a researcher or something like that. Sure. But when you think of professions, businesses, industries, they have clients, there's customers, there are users, you know, of services and products. And most of the times those interactions involve some type of data processing or transfer. Now, sometimes even, you know, not in the academic sense, but in industries, businesses, professions, there's still research purposes that go on. So I've worked on numerous establishment surveys with businesses or organizations. Market research takes place. So a company might be interested in doing process or program improvement. There's also this component of gathering, interacting with data for a service on behalf of a client or customer. And I have worked on, so even within the world of research, even projects that are not considered, they're not deemed by like an institutional review board to actually be considered research, or perhaps they are not considered research with human subjects. So when working in the research world that's not identified as research or with human subjects, the principles that we go over today, we still use to guide the work. And that's how I see people using this information most often in their workplace environments and in their businesses that aren't academic or necessarily research based. And I think it's because, you know, the common saying or belief that when you know better, you can do better. Okay, so the first thing, personally identifiable information, this is often referred to as PII, and this includes any information that can be used to distinguish or trace an individual's identity. So the common things we see, you know, people's names, right, their social security number, date and place of birth, mother's maiden name, biometric records. And then the second component of this that's often forgot about is any information that is linked or linkable to an individual. And this can include medical, educational, financial, and employment information. So in the next several slides, we're going to go through and identify, you know, it might be refreshing your memory. It might call out some things that perhaps you weren't clear that was considered PII. And so, but as we go through that, I'm sure that you're going to immediately see things that you come in contact with on a daily basis as part of the work that you do. Okay, so here are some examples. So first up, like we see, you know, the names, right? Full name, their maiden name, mother's maiden name, even alias names are considered PII. This next section, I like to think of all the numbers, right? So social security number, passport number, alien registration numbers, driver's license numbers, taxpayer identification numbers, patient identification numbers, financial account numbers, and even including credit card numbers. Here's some more examples. So personal address information, so street address. This can also include email address, personal telephone numbers, car VIN numbers or title numbers. And then we also have personal characteristics, so photographic images, particularly of their face or other identifying characteristics, fingerprints, even handwriting can be considered PII. All of the biometric data, so retina scans, voice signatures, facial geometry, and then asset information, so IP addresses, MAC addresses, so anything that consistently links to a specific person. And now on this slide, we have that while these examples on their own do not necessarily constitute PII, so several people may have the same birth date. When you combine pieces of data such as these, you can end up linking them to a person. And so that's why I always like to point this out. So again, on their own, plenty of people may be born in Durham, but once you combine a birthplace with, let's say, a birth date, and then where someone is working, you could easily identify some. So that combination is considered PI. So some examples of that, date of birth, place of birth, their business telephone number, business mailing address, business email address, race, religion, geographical indicators, employment information, and financial information. So then moving on to what's called protected health information. So this is often referred to as PHI. So this is any information, in someone's medical record or their designated record set, a DRS, that's often another phrase for someone's medical record that can be used to identify that person. And this is typically, records that are created or used during the course of providing a healthcare service. So when, they were being diagnosed with something or treated for a condition. This is often in reference to HIPAA regulations. But I think it's important to, frame your thinking again about, what are we considering data? So any of this protected health information. And then there's a bullet here, PHI does not include individually identifiable health information in personnel records or education records. And I like to point this out because while some information may not be considered PHI in educational records, like we just saw, there's certain PI in educational records that are considered personal identifiable information. So even if it's not necessarily within that umbrella term, it's included in something else. So here are some examples. So again, all the names, right? So all geographical subdivisions that are smaller than state. So that includes street address, the city, county, precinct, zip code, all equivalent geocodes. All elements of dates, except for the year, for dates that directly are related to an individual. So again, birth date. And then you've got some more of these that are more medical or healthcare specific. So an admission date, a discharge date, a date of death, and then, all ages over 89 and all elements of dates, including the year indicative of such an age, except that such ages and elements may be aggregated into a single category. So I still, it's really wordy, but I still like to just, leave all the dates as PHI. Again, all of the numbers, so phone numbers, fax numbers, electronic mail addresses, social security numbers, medical record numbers, the beneficiary numbers, account numbers, certificate and license numbers, VIN numbers, license plate numbers, device identifier, serial numbers, URLs, IP addresses, again, the biometric information, full photographic images, and then, any other unique identifying number, characteristic, or code can be considered PHI. And so then here, just quickly to talk a little bit more about FERPA, so the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So basically, this is a federal law that protects the privacy of student education records. And so generally schools have to have written permission from a parent or eligible student in order to release any information from a student's educational record. However, there are exceptions. And so there's several listed here that they are able to disclose those records. And so a lot of times in businesses, if you are in a practice or an industry where you might be receiving these records, you want to make certain you are protecting them, maintaining confidentiality, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So there's several ways that you can come across these records. All right, so we've gone through and identified several pieces of data, combinations of data. And so now we want to talk a little bit more about, if you're gathering this information or how you're gathering it, what makes it ethical. So a lot of those pieces of information, a lot of that data that we talked about can be public records, right? Like you can go and you can find that information. It's a public record. But you could also be gathering information or gathering data from clients or customers during interviews. That can be both formally or informally. Emails, you might be doing, email communication, texting, phone calls. You can be downloading information, let's say from secured websites. You might be gathering data from the mail, right? So hard copy, you might be getting things mailed to you, faxed to you. You might be going to pick up pieces of data. You might be also getting data directly from people through conversations and other types of interactions. And so during your communication with people, you can use the social science framework to guide how you interact with them. So if you're asking questions or actively seeking information from them, you can use this framework to guide your practices. And so why is this important? Well, one, just the ethical and moral responsibility, right, that we have to our professions and to our places of work. And two, in a very specific workplace and very practical terms, if you are governing in your workplace with bad practices, let's say you're sloppy, you're losing data, someone's information is stolen from your workplace, you have misplaced things, if you're being deceptive in the workplace, that can harm your business, right? I mean, so again, from a very practical standpoint, there's very real implications to your business. You can lose business, you can be involved in litigation for that, depending on the practices. And again, that just from a business perspective has very real consequence. Okay, so here is just a screenshot of something called the Belmont Report. So if you're not necessarily familiar with social science research principles, just at a very high level, this is one that is a significant driver of the practices and guidelines in social science. So back in the 70s, around 1974, there was the National Research Act that was signed into law, thereby creating the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects there in biomedical and behavioral social research. And one of the charges of that commission was to identify basic ethical principles that should govern the conduct of biomedical, behavioral, and social science research. So anything involving human subjects. And those principles should be the guidelines that everyone uses follows to assure that their research is being conducted in valid and respectful ways. So sorry about that. Okay, so the three principles that came out of that report, so it's called the Belmont Report. It's respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And so here's the first one. So respect for persons. So this respect for persons incorporates at least two ethical convictions. So first, the individual should be treated as autonomous agents. And second, that persons with diminished autonomy are entitled to protection. So each person, each research subject, you should treat them as an individual. They are capable of making up their own mind about whether or not they want to talk with you or interact with you. And then for folks who might have a diminished capability, so for example, this could be someone who is too young, they're incarcerated, they're incapacitated, or they are in some other way vulnerable, they should still receive special protection to maintain their autonomy and whether or not they want to participate in research or talk with someone. In practice, what this means, you want to treat individuals as capable of making decisions. You don't want to make decisions for them. Folks should feel free to volunteer in a conversation or providing data to you. There's 2 moral requirements listed here. So the principle of respect for persons divides into 2 separate moral requirements: the requirement to acknowledge autonomy and the requirement to protect those. So again, just reinforcing that you want to look at people as autonomous, and if someone, does not have the capacity to have that their own voice in what they're doing, we're required to protect them in that sense. And the second one, beneficence. So 2 general rules were formulated. So it comes from this Hippocratic maxim: do no harm to people. And we want to maximize possible benefits and minimize any possible harm to folks. So you want to make certain their well-being is protected. You are protecting them from harm as much as possible. Any benefits to the person, you want to maximize that benefit. And essentially the benefits for individuals need to outweigh the risk of participating. And then the third one is justice. And so this principle really advocates for fair treatments for all. So it implies that, your subjects in a research project should be selected equitably. No one group of people, such as a group of people who are economically disadvantaged, if they have limited cognitive capacity, or as a result of any, situation that they are easily manipulated, we shouldn't exploit them and pick more of them in a particular research environment. And so how can we use these principles, right, to talk about gathering data ethically, particularly in a business or workplace sense? So here are some concepts. So the first one being informed consent. And so at a most basic level, you are informing someone about what's being involved for them to then offer their consent to agree to participate in that project or situation, conversation. And so when you are approaching people or talking with them or sharing that, what is involved in informing someone about this, to gather informed consent? It includes being transparent, being honest about what is involved and what is happening. In the research sense, you are being very clear to identify the purpose of the research, how long you expect to interact with this person or their time commitment, all procedures and protocols that will be included during this process. Critical, you do not want to be deceptive, right? You don't want to record people without letting them know or without getting their consent. You don't want to misrepresent who you are or what you're doing. And so, as we go through that and I'm talking about it, I'm sure you can think about in your own work how this would apply, right? How you want to maintain transparency, remain honesty in what you are working on and not be deceptive in your day-to-day operations in your workplace. Minimal risk, we talked about that some, but again, just not putting them in harm's way at all. Voluntary participation, so treating people, they have the right to decline to talk with you or to participate in what you're doing. You don't threaten people, you don't harass them, you don't want to intimidate them to interact with you or participate in a conversation, and you don't want to bribe someone. And then confidentiality and security. So as you go through your day-to-day, operations, you don't share the information that you come in contact with anyone, definitely not at home or socially, but even, within your workplace environments, it may be the setup where not everyone in the office or not everyone there in your workplace needs access to certain information. So restricting that, keeping it private from those who are not involved in a particular, case or project that you're working on, and that you also have detailed plans and protocols in place to store data and information securely. And so then talking a little bit more about confidentiality and security. And one thing I want to point out, so there's a difference in confidentiality and maintaining someone's anonymous nature. So confidentiality really means that who this data belongs to, really, that you know whose it is, you can link it back to them, and you don't disclose it. So you maintain that confidentiality. And then something in anonymous fashion means that you have no idea who the information belongs to. And so again, when you think about your work, most of the time in a business setting, again, client, customer, the user of a service, you know who it is, right? Like you know who that information belongs to. And so when we think in terms of ethics, we want to make certain we are protecting that. So let's talk about how you can do that. So some, again, very practical ways in thinking about this. Most people now, in the digital world, we're working on computers. And so that can be secure shares where you're saving electronic information using passwords on your computer, having restricted access to different file locations and things like that, encrypting and password protecting actual files. So if it's in Word or Excel, or if you're saving it to an FTP site, again, adding a password and sharing that only with folks who need to access that. I would strongly encourage you, don't email unprotected documents. It's just not a great practice. We have a picture here of the filing cabinet. So locking up physical hard copy or printout copies of documents in a filing cabinet, using a shredder when you are done with the information. So actually disposing of that by shredding it, not just throwing it out. And then one thing, so when you have interacted with someone, or if you have gone to pick up, data pieces, hard copy pieces, when you're transporting them, so using them in a locked compartment, envelopes, folders, Tyvek envelopes for extra security, again, just to make certain that you are transporting and securing all of that information. And so that is just the end of my presentation. And now we can go through any questions that you all may have.
All right, folks, I'm going to open the floor. If anyone has any questions, you can just chime in or drop them in the chat. I will read them out loud, but this is your chance to ask questions. All right, going once, going twice. All right, Jessica, is there contact information if anyone has questions after this that we can share, email?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Feel free if you want to, I can put it in the chat also here. And we at the Odom Institute just So everyone knows we do a lot of consultation about, data collection, particularly social science research practices. But you do not have to be affiliated with the university. So I meet with people from all over the place all the time just to talk through different procedures, protocols, things like that. So I'm happy to chat.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk
Yeah.
with us today.
Thank
Thank you to everyone who attended. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.